Today's daf we're going to be learning is Kiddushin daf and Gimel. This week's daf is sponsored by Sarah Zahavi for the Refuah Shlema of Tinok Ben Talia Nechama. And today's daf is sponsored by Tov and David Kestenbaum in honor of the birth of their grandson, Naveh Eitan, son of their children Avital and Dvir Gamliel. May he grow in Torah, mitzvot, and good deeds. Mazel tov. Okay, we are now going to get started with the bottom of Nun Bet Amud Bet. What we finished, first of all, there's a study guide for today that will help you. Secondly, there will be no regular Zoom tomorrow, but the shiur will go up today. I'll put up Ezrat Hashem today after class. I'll put up both today's daf, tomorrow's daf, and Shabbos' daf so people can get a head start. And we'll go back to regular Zoom on Sunday, which will be yontif for some of you, but not for people in Israel. Okay, we will now review where we ended. We ended with this sugya of a very interesting sugya of Rabbi Yehuda being a little bit intimidated by the students of Rabbi Meir, didn't really want to allow them into the Beit Midrash, and Sumchus pushes his way in, asks this question. Rabbi Yehuda says, see, told you I was right. He's just trying to bug me and try to trip me up. And basically, in the end, what happens, Rabbi Yosi comes in, the peacemaker, and he says, you think that there's no reality to this case that Sumchus mentioned in the name of Rabbi Meir, but of course there's a reality because you think women don't go into the Azara. But first of all, right, their father could have betrothed them, they could have sent a messenger, or even they could have pushed their way in. And this really seems to be a way of Rabbi Yosi criticizing Rabbi Yehuda for not allowing people to go into his Beit Midrash, because he basically ends by saying, look, the women can even push their way in. In other words, if you close the doors, right, it makes people want to push their way in. And look, Sumchus had to push his way in. And really, maybe he's trying to say there's room for everyone. It's interesting they're using women as their example, right? There's room for women in the Azara, right? Either, again, like Rashi, maybe they shouldn't. But if you take Tosfot's approach, which is they're just not usually there, but they still could be there. And maybe he's saying, it's kind of a critique, you shouldn't be pushing this, kind of closing the doors for the students. And look, Sumchus pushed his way in, and we should make room for other students as well. In any case, he basically shows Rabbi Yehuda that there is a reality to this case, which is interesting because the next line is Tanya. There's a braita that says, now remember, let's just review the case. The case was, because we got sidetracked by the details, the case was that is our Mishnah, which is the first part of our Mishnah was Kohanim who get portions from the sacrifices, if they use it to betroth a woman, which was basically what Rabbi Yehuda said, how on earth could they use kodesh kodesh to betroth a woman? It would have to be eaten in the Azara. They would have to do the betrothal in the Azara because you can't take the meat out of there. Well, how, right? Basically, Rabbi Meir says, if you do that, it's not effective. The next line is, there's a braita that says that Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mikudeshet. Rabbi Yehuda, I guess, was convinced by Rabbi Yosi that there could be a reality to this case. And in fact, not only that, but he goes so far as to say, he argues with Rabbi Meir, which makes sense. He says, I disagree with you. First, it was kind of, I don't even think this case has a possible reality, or at least the kodesh kodesh part. But comes Rabbi Yehuda and he says, if it does in fact happen, she's actually betrothed. Okay, Rabbi Yosi sides on the side of Rabbi Meir and says, Eina Mikudesh. Okay, so we now see that the machloket, what Sumchus quote in the name of Rabbi Meir, which appears in our Mishnah, is actually also a machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosi. And remember, we passed on like Rabbi Yosi, we said, so it makes sense here that we hold like Rabbi Yosi, like our Mishnah. I'm a Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan tells us now, Shnehem Ikra Hadar Shu, they both learned it from the same pasuk, but different words in the pasuk. Pasuk is talking about the Kohanim, and it says, Ze yeh lecha mikodesh kodeshim min ha'esh. This will be for you. First, we're going to darshan that word, for you, from the high level of sanctity, min ha'esh, from the fire, meaning it'll come off the fire and then you get it. These parts. So Rabbi Yehuda savar lecha, what does it mean lecha for you? L'chol tzrachecha, for whatever you want it to be for. You can now use it for anything you want. It's yours. So that means if you want to betroth a woman, go for it. It's yours to do whatever you want with it, which we're going to see later. Like Truma, for example, Kohanim can betroth a woman with. It's theirs. It's a gift that they get, and it's entirely theirs. But Rabbi Yosi saval ke'esh. Ma'esh la'achila, afhunami la'achila. No, it says mina esh. What does it mean, mina esh? From the fire? Well, meaning it's like a fire. Now, fire, what can fire do with sanctified items? It can only burn them. That's what it does. Now, the word achila often comes up with the mizbeach, with the altar. It means it eats it, right? Because to eat is to burn it is to eat it. It really is like the word to consume. It's consumed in the fire. So afunami la'achila. Likewise, anything that the Kohen gets from things that were on the altar, these sanctified items, the kodeshim, they're given to him to eat only. Okay, they're not given to him for any other purpose, meaning you cannot betroth a woman with it. It's just given to you to eat. We talked about that with the Shemitah. The Shemitah produce is given to you to eat. We thought to say eat and nothing else, but we said, no. Shemitah, you can actually betroth a woman. We saw the case in the Mishnah where they did that, but not sanctified items. These sanctified items that were on the altar or that come from the sacrifices, Kohanim are not allowed to use them for any other purpose. Again, that's Rabbi Yosi and Rabbi Meir's approach. So we have two different approaches here, whether it's for them to use for whatever they want, just like truma and other things, or not. Nimnuva gamru. Now, I'm sorry, I skipped the words. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, Nimnuva gamru. They got up and they took a vote and they said, Hamekadesh bechalko ben kochikoch ben kochikalan lo kidesh. Meaning, even Rabbi Yehuda was in the Beit Midrash. They got up, they took a vote, and he ended up, whether he agreed with them or not, but a vote was taken, and this was the halacha, and he ends up agreeing that this is the halacha. Okay, he ends up saying, according to Rabbi Yochanan, Rav is going to disagree, but Rabbi Yochanan conceded to the rabbis and said, you know what, you're right, we're not going to allow the Kohanim to do this. Now, again, first of all, there was no Beit HaMikdash anymore. There's a theoretical question, but theoretically, Kohanim are not allowed to use this to betroth a woman. Rav says, no, it's actually still a machloket. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda didn't change his position. So now we're going to bring a proof that Rabbi Yochanan is right, and then we're going to bring a proof that Rav is right. We're going to try to bring a proof. Did Rabbi Yochanan change his position or not? So we're now going to start a very long braita that's going to prove Rabbi Yochanan. The first thing you need to know is really the last thing they're going to say about this, but I'll preface it by saying, because you won't see Rabbi Yehuda's name in this braita, but basically Abaye says, Kavatei de Rabbi Yochanan mistabra. Rabbi Yochanan makes a lot of sense based on the following braita. This braita is a Midrash Halacha. Midrash Halacha is called Safra on Vayikra or Torat Kohanim. It goes by two names. And just like we've said Stam Mishnah, we just said this yesterday, Mishnah without a name is attributed to Rabbi Meir. Tosefta without a name is attributed to Rabbi Chia. No, sorry, that's not true. That was a mistake. He wrote the Tosefta. I now forgot who it's attributed to, the Tosefta. But the Safra is attributed to Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, we'll get to these sugiyot where they talk about which books are attributed to which rabbi. If you have a stam opinion there without a name, we assume, okay, the default is, because these books were written, each one with a different school of, school meaning like Rabbi Meir's school, Rabbi Yehuda's school, his school of thought. So the stam safra is attributed to Rabbi Yehuda. And now we're going to quote a stam safra. So we're going to assume this is Rabbi Yehuda. And the basic gist of this is, if you get a portion as a Kohen from, okay, how do you get a portion, by the way? So all the Kohanim worked in Mishmarot, okay, and they worked in weeks. They had each 2 weeks a year they would come, plus the holidays. When it was your week to work, you would come, your whole family, and it would be your job to work. And then they would split it into days. Each family within that big family would kind of be split into days. And if it was your day to work, you would get the meat and the meal offerings of that day. So we're now going to see that if you get a portion, you're not allowed to trade with anybody else. Let's say you're a vegetarian and you don't want the meat, you want the meal offerings, or you don't like chicken and you want to switch it for meat, and someone else is very happy to switch with you, you cannot switch. Now that's going to be Rabbi Yehuda, because we're going to assume Stam Safra is Rabbi Yehuda. And if you can't switch, what does that show? Well, if it's for you and you can betroth a woman with it, obviously you can trade. But if it's not yours to trade, and you can't trade it, then it sounds like, well, you can't betroth a woman. And since Rabbi Yehuda is going to say you can't trade, it seems clear that he changed his position. And that's going to be our proof. But to get there, we're going to have a long-winded braita that's going to basically darshan. If you look at the study guide, I brought the psukim on the sheet. We're going to start with these two psukim in Vayikra chapter 7, verses 9 and 10. So I'll read the psukim first so you have an understanding of where they're going with this. They're going to have a list of all different kinds of meal offerings. Meal offerings were made in different ways. Okay, any mincha that's baked in the oven, anyone that's done in marcheshet, which is like a deep fry type thing, so it comes out soft like a lafa, ve'al machvat, on a griddle, which comes out more like a fried, hard kind of frying, right, where the texture will be very hard. Okay, there's this Seidel's bakery in Israel where they actually prepare the menachot offerings, and I went once, and this makes all of menachot much more understandable. So if you have an opportunity, especially before we get to Masechet Menachot and Zvachim, which comes after all of I'm sorry, not in zvachim, in kodshim, zvachim, and then menachot. Okay, so that's going to come after our next seder of nizikin. Highly recommended to go there. You'll have a much better understanding of all the meal offerings. So now we have the maaser b'tanur. It's baked in an oven. It's done in a marcheshet, the steep fry. It's done in a machvat. It is given lakohen makriv oto lo tiyeh. The kohen who does this is the one who's the kohen who sacrifices. He's the one who it is given to. The next pasuk then says v'chol mincha b'lu'ula b'shem, another description of the mincha. Anyone that's mixed with oil. Some of them were mixed with oil. Some of them weren't. V'charava, and dry. L'chol b'nei Aaron tiyeh ish b'achiv. Here are the keywords. For all of the sons of Aaron, it will be ish ka'achiv. Each one gets an equal portion. Now, what they're going to basically learn from this l'kol means everybody gets it, meaning you get what you get and you can't trade, right? You get what you get, you can't get upset. This is what you get, you're done, can't trade. And now, because it says in so many different ways, this mincha and that mincha and that mincha, which, by the way, were mentioned earlier. It's like we know they're all different kinds of minchas because it was mentioned in the earlier chapters. So, right, it comes up in chapter 2, it comes up in chapter 6, and there's a description of all the different minachot. So why is it listing each of them here? So basically, this long braita is going to tell us each one is coming to say you can't trade this with that, and you can't trade this with that, and you can't trade this with that. And each time they're going to say, why might you have thought if you could trade this with that? Maybe you couldn't, maybe you could, you can't trade this and that, but maybe you could trade this. There's another word in the pasuk which comes to teach you, no, you can't. That's going to be the gist of it. So let's see it inside the Tanya, as it says in a braita. How do you know that if you have a mincha and you want to trade it with an animal sacrifice, the meat of the animal, you can't do that? Talmud lomar, so it starts off with any mincha that you bake in the oven, and then it says, again, they're quoting the beginning of the first pasuk we read and the end of the second pasuk we read, l'chol b'nei Aaron tiyeh, gets divided equally among all the sons of Aaron. Again, not all the sons, but all the ones that are there on the mishmar that day. And therefore, you can't trade. So what can't you trade right now? Meat and meal offering. Well, okay, once you have that, you would think maybe it's just mincha and meat. Why? Because those two, if you remember, there's the korban levi yored, which you bring on certain circumstances, where it's called the sliding scale offering, because if you're wealthy, you bring an animal. If you're less wealthy, you bring 2 birds instead. If you're less wealthy than that, you bring a meal offering. Now notice, you trade the meat for a bird. You don't trade the meat for a meal offering. Now, in the end, you do, because if you're really poor, but the meaning is it goes from meat to bird to animal to bird to meal offering, which is made of flour. So basically, they're saying, well, you can't trade the meat with the meal offering because it's 2 levels below. You trade it for the bird, and if you can't do the bird, then you trade it for the meal. So therefore, you might say, look, those two have no connection. They're too distant from each other. But maybe a mincha could be switched with a bird because they're basically, right, they're interchangeable. That's why it says, now it's a little bit tricky. It doesn't say, but again, we're taking piece from the first pasuk and connecting it with a piece from the second pasuk, right? L'chol b'nei Aaron is at the end of that section. The assumption is that those words l'chol b'nei Aaron are referring to each. It's almost like you have bullet points. You have l'chol maaser b'tanur, marcheshet. We're going to go on machvat. We're going to go on to mincha b'lu'ula b'shemen, and we're going to go on to chareva. There's going to be 5 descriptions of the mincha, and each of them are referring to the words l'chol b'nei Aaron, or is referring to each of those 5. Again, each one doesn't really relate to the type of mincha. It's just an extra word, or an extra case, which is then going to teach us a new thing that can't be traded. So you can't trade bird for mincha or vice versa. Well, you could say, okay, that's obvious. You can't trade a bird with a meal offering because the birds have blood in them and they're live. We would say this is live and right, animate, inanimate. Right? This is made from kemach. Those are 2 very different types of offerings. But maybe you would think, but maybe you could trade a bird and meat, right? You like chicken better than meat. I like meat better than chicken. Let's trade. Because they're both sacrificed in the same way. You slaughter them, the blood comes out. A third description of the mincha, which really seemingly unnecessary. It must be coming to teach you, no, right? Now, it's interesting because they're learning from Mincha about birds and animals, but it doesn't really matter. The point is there's an extra word, an extra case. It must be coming to say you can't trade that either. Well, you could say, look, there's a big difference between animals and birds, because birds are slaughtered by the Kohen with his finger. If you remember, it's called malika. Takes his finger, puts it in the back of his thumb, uses it to slaughter the animal from the back of its neck. And the animals are slaughtered with an implement, with a knife. But maybe different types of mincha offerings you could trade, because they're all done by hand. Okay, there were no mix masters at the time. They did everything by hand. So they were mixed by hand, the doughs, and therefore you maybe could trade them because they're done in the same way. They're cooked in a different way, but they're prepared in the same way. Talmud Lomar, fourth case to say you can't switch mincha with mincha. Okay, next. Okay, fine. So you can't switch minchas. Well, what kind of mincha can't you switch with each other? Well, you can't switch the marcheshet with the machva, because one is soft and one is hard. Right? We said one is more like a lapa, it's deep fried, it's very soft. The other one comes out very hard, fried with a little bit of oil. So you might say, okay, those are two very different things. But let's say, now why you want to do this, I don't know, but perhaps this machva was, right, we all like, some people like well-done cookies, some people like soft cookies, right? So it could be one got burnt more and one got burnt less. And you say, oh, I like that kind better and I like this kind better, and let's trade. They're both hard. It's just one is maybe a little more burnt than the other. Maybe I could do this. Or they're both soft, and it's just, I like this one better than that one. Talmud Lomar, so again, there's this last word, the fifth one, lecharava. This now teaches you can't switch anything. Not two things that are identical, not two things that are different, not two things that are different levels. It doesn't matter. You can't switch anything. Now, all this, okay, the braita continues and says, maybe this is all for high-level sanctity. But maybe in the lower level sanctity, maybe it's less sanctified, so maybe you can switch it. Talmud Lomar, now we're going to jump to the next pasuk. Okay, it's really two pasukim later. The middle pasuk is just an intro to the next section, which is the next section is, okay, ish kachiv is the last two words of our pasuk. Okay, l'chol b'nei Aaron tiyeh ish kachiv, each one like his brother. That means equal. And then it says, im al todah. If you're bringing a korban todah, this is what you have to do. Now, korban todah is kochim kalim. So the fact that this section is put right next to a section on kochim kalim teaches you by smichut, by the juxtaposition, that this section that we just read must apply to kochim kalim as well. And therefore, also kochim kalim you can't trade. So that's what we learned here. You can't switch even in the lower level sanctity. One last rasha, not really connected to our purpose, but it's a part of this braita, ish. Why does it say ish? So they say, ish cholek afilu ba'amum, ve'en achatan cholek afilu tam. So now they say, what does it tell you, ish kachiv? Who gets this? Only ish, meaning not a minor. Okay, when we divide this up, we divide among all the male kohanim that are above the age of, again, whatever, usually, nowadays it's 13. In those days, it's more based on simanim and maturity. But basically, all the male kohanim above the age of maturity would get it. And even if they were balmum, even if they had a blemish. Now, blemish kohanim can't do the avoda, so they can't do, let's say, the kmitza of the korban, of the mincha offering, the meal offering, or they can't do the sacrificing of, the blood. They can't actually slaughter, and they would take worms out of the wood that would go on the altar. They had certain jobs they could do it because they worked. If they were on the mishmar that week, they also got a portion, okay, even though they weren't doing the actual sacrifices. That's a side point. Back to our topic. So now the Gemara tells us, why do we bring this? Let's try to remember. We wanted to prove Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said that Rabbi Yehuda changed his mind and said that if you get these kodesh kodshim, kodshim kalim, all these gifts that you get, the kohanim would get from the sacrifices, he said originally you can betroth the woman with it. Then Rabbi Yochanan said he changed his mind and said you can't. Now this source, Stam Sifra Mane Rabbi Yehuda, this is a Safra, which is a Midrash Halacha and Sefer Vayikra, and we assume Stam Safra is Rabbi Yehuda, and he holds here that you can't trade. If you can't trade, it means it's not yours to trade. It means it's not yours to betroth either. So it must be he changed his mind. Shema mina. Amar Rav. But Rava comes and says, what are you talking about? I have a braita that holds like Rav, that Rabbi Yehuda kept his opinion and didn't change his mind. Uchirav milotanya, is there not a braita like Rav? Vahatanya, now this is describing a stage at the end of the Second Temple period where things were no longer great in the temple. There were all sorts of things that used to happen that were no longer happening. And because it started to get corrupt, the whole, if you remember, Kohanim Gedolim were buying their, to be a Kohen Gadol, they would switch every year. It was all very different. This is after the time of Shimon HaTzadik. And from that time on, the Lechem HaPanim ended up being very small. It wasn't big. It wasn't enough to divide between all the Kohanim. So because it wasn't really enough for everyone to eat enough to actually be satiated, what they did, this is the showbread in the temple, so the Kohanim who were tznuim, who were humble, would basically not take. Okay, they said, it's not worth it. It's so little. Why am I going to bother taking? Hagargiranim cholkim. And the ones who were ravenous, they would take their portion. And what does it mean, cholkim? Right now, they assume it means they would basically barter. They would say, okay, we want more bread, so we'll give you something else of ours and we'll take more bread. Okay, and then they would take more of the bread because in that way, that's the assumption, which would show that what? Somebody thinks that you can take, you can trade, because it seems they were trading and seems like it was okay. So basically, it seems like you could trade. Now, the only one who said that was Rabbi Yehuda, so it must be Rabbi Yehuda didn't change his mind. To which the Gemara says, what are you talking about? My chokim chotfim. They weren't taking it legitimately fair and square. They were grabbing it. They were stealing it. It wasn't theirs to take, but they would grab it anyway. In other words, the humble people would say, oh, it's not enough. I'm not going to bother taking it. So the other people who were ravenous, the Kohanim, they would just grab all of it, even though it wasn't really theirs to take. And it was actually, what you say, against the law. They weren't doing it with permission. And how do we know this? It says at the end of that source, there was a guy who grabbed his portion and his friend's portion, and they called him son of a thief for the rest of his life because he took this portion that wasn't his. So here you see, that's the end of that source. They clearly were taking it against the law, and this doesn't prove anything about what Rabbi Yehuda holds, because this isn't the law. This is people who went against the law. It actually even proves the opposite, which is, well, it doesn't prove about what Rabbi Yehuda holds, but at least the mainstream opinion, which we knew anyway, was that you can't take them. You can't trade. Amar Rabba bar Rav Shila Maikra, what pasuk do we learn? This is just an aside. How do we know the word ben chamtzan? The chamtzan is the son of a thief. How do you get that to that translation of that word? Elohai palteni miyad rasham mikaf ma'avel v'chometz. This is God save me from all evil. It's a pasuk, from the hands of a ma'avel, a person who does bad deeds, v'chometz, and a thief. Rabba amar mehacha. Rabba bring a different pasuk from the first chapter of Yeshayahu. Limdu heitev dirshu mishpat. Learn well, seek justice, ashlu chamotz, and validate the ones who get robbed. In other words, return stolen things to people who get robbed. Here you see the shoresh chamotz as people who were robbed or items that were taken. So it has to do with theft. Okay, that's the end of the section of the parts of the Kohanim. That was the first section of our Mishnah that we managed to understand. Now we have to get to the two sections we didn't yet manage to understand properly. So maaser sheni is the next case. I'm going back to the Mishnah for a minute. Bein b'shogeg, bein b'mizid, lo kiddush. Divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says, whether you use maaser sheni intentionally to betroth a woman, you knew it was maaser sheni, or you didn't know it was maaser sheni, and you only find out later it was maaser sheni. Either which way, she's not betrothed. And why is that? Because maaser sheni is mamon gavoa. It belongs to God. Since it belongs to God, it's not can't be used for Kiddushin. So it doesn't matter shogeg or mezid. Let's stop here for right now. Right now, we only understand Rabbi Meir. We'll get to Rabbi Yehuda later, who basically thinks that it's mamon hedyot, but he makes this distinction shogeg and mezid, which we'll understand in the next section. So the Gemara wants to know where does Rabbi Meir get it that mamon, the maaser sheni is mamon gavoa, and we're going to basically have, just like we had in this braita, all these stages. We're going to have a number of stages. It's going to be different than the braita, but a number of stages of trying to understand which part of this pasuk is he darshaning, which words. He had a tradition about this, and he quotes this pasuk. Comes from this pasuk, "B'chol ma'aseh ha'aretz mizera ha'aretz mipri ha'etz la'Hashemu kodesh la'Hashem." Okay, this is a pasuk in Vayikra. It's not clear from the pshat that it's talking about maaser sheni, but the tradition is that this is talking about maaser sheni. All the maaser of the land, from the pri ha'etz, is all for God. Kodesh la'Hashem, it's sanctified to God. So which part are we going to darshan? There's already, you can see there's a few words you could darshan. Lahashemu, kodesh laHashem. So first they start with laHashem, just the word laHashem. So now they say laHashemhu. Okay, that first part. Below the kadesh bo'isha, it's for God, and not to betroth a woman. So now they say, wait a minute. You want to say the words because it said Hashem in that pasuk, it means it belongs to God and not to you. But wait, we have another pasuk that says Hashem, and it's not belonging to God. Let's see what it is, and you can betroth a woman with it. Hare trumat maaser. What's trumat maaser? It's the truma that the Levi has to give from the portion that the Levi receives. He receives a tenth. He has to give a truma from there. And it says there, "Kain talimu gamatem trumat Hashem." You also have to take the truma of God. Well, if it's the truma of God, then what would you say? Can a Kohen sanctify betroth a woman with truma? No, because it's God. Well, utznan, it says in the Mishnah, hakadesh betruma mekudeshet. It actually is effective. So what do you see here? The word Hashem doesn't necessarily mean that it belongs to Hashem and you can't betroth with it. So, second attempt. Delo k'tiv be la Hashem. They say, wait, you're comparing Hashem and la Hashem. La Hashem means to God. That's what it said in our pasuk. That pasuk just said it's the truma of God. It doesn't say it's truma to God. So they say it must be because it says la Hashem in our pasuk. Now they say this isn't changing it. It's just honing in more on. It's the la Hashem part. The lamed is important. But they say that doesn't work either. It says truma achala you should give to God. Now again, it's to the kohanim, it's not to God. And what do we know? Chala is just like truma. So what do we know? It's not a mekadesh betrumot mekudeshet. If you mekadesh with anything that's considered truma, which is chala, it's the same thing. It works. So here you see la Hashem doesn't mean it belongs to God and not to you, and you can't betroth with it. So next attempt. Delo k'tiv be kodesh. Oh wait, that just says give it to God. It didn't say it's kodesh la Hashem. Now all of a sudden we're saying it's not just la Hashem. Who? It's because it says kodesh la Hashem. It's sanctified to God. The word kodesh and la Hashem together, that phrase would convince you. But they say, no, that doesn't work either, because you see that phrase somewhere else where also you're allowed to betroth a woman with it. What is that? Okay, the Shemitah produce, which we already learned you can betroth a woman from. We saw the case where the guy did it. And it says Yovel hi, okay, the Shemitah year is Yovel hi, kodesh tia lachem, it will be sanctified for you. Utnan mekadesh b'perot shvit mekudeshet. So it says they're kodesh, and yet it's not to God. To which the Gemara says, well, it didn't say kodesh la Hashem, right? Delo k'tiv be la Hashem. Okay, so you don't have the combination kodesh la Hashem. You only have kodesh there. First we start with la Hashem. We said, oh, you're missing kodesh. Now we say you had kodesh, but you didn't have la Hashem. That's why. So now they say, wait, but now we're going to find somewhere where it says kodesh and it says la Hashem, and it's talking about truma. And again, truma, you can betroth with. Hare truma dichtiv. Okay, now we're in a pasuk in Yirmia. Kodesh Yisrael la Hashem, Reshit Fuato. This is actually talking about the Jewish people are sanctified to God. They are like the first of the produce. In other words, we are among the nations like the first of your produce that you bring to God, that you sanctify. So now they say the following. So they're calling Truma Kodesh la Hashem, because they're saying the Jewish people are sanctified to God like Truma. So there you would think then Truma can't, right? If you're going to say Kodesh la Hashem means can't betroth, then you shouldn't be allowed to betroth. To which they say, but that pasuk will be Israel k'tiv. That pasuk was talking about the Jewish people. It wasn't talking about Truma. It was talking about the Jewish people. To which we're turning now to Amabet. But okay, it was talking about the Jewish people, but it was saying the Jewish people are like Truma in the fact that they are Kodesh LaHashem. So again, that means in any case, even though the pasuk, the subject wasn't Truma, it was talking about Truma and it was saying Truma sanctified to God. So therefore, sanctification to God should mean like Truma, and Truma you can betroth the woman with. And therefore, how can you say maaser sheni? Because it says Kodesh LaHashem, you can't betroth the woman. Doesn't make any sense. To which they have to go to their last attempt. Tirgama Ravin Saba Kamei de Rav. So Ravin, the elder, explained in front of Rav. Amar Kra, the pasuk says who. Remember, it started with Lashem who. We're now going back to where we started. Behavayato Yehe. Okay, now they just say, what does it mean? Who? It means it stays as it is. It's sanctified to God, and that's the way it remains. There's a special here because it says Kodesh Hashem. Now the question is, what exactly? Which words are they learning it from? Are they learning from all four that it says La Hashem who Kodesh La Hashem, or who La Hashem? I forget how it went, but is it a combination of all of them, or is it back to really just that word who? That's unique. That doesn't appear, if you notice, in any of the psukim we quoted, and therefore they learn from there. It's unique. Okay, that was all just to get to the source for Rabbi Meir for this halacha. Now we're going to get to the a little bit complicated part, which is going to start today and continue into tomorrow's daf, about both the distinction Rabbi Yehuda makes between shogeg and mazid by the maaser sheni, and that same distinction is made by Rabbi Meir in the next case. Okay, we didn't really explain these cases yet, so let's just look back at the Mishnah for a minute. Okay, it just sounds very confusing until you understand it, so I didn't want to spend too much time on it. But if you notice, so maaser sheni, the first line is very easy. Ben shogeg ben mazid lo hekdesh, Rabbi Meir, that we just explained. Rabbi Meir says it belongs to God, and therefore it doesn't matter whether you intentionally used it, unintentionally used it, wasn't yours to use, you can't betroth a woman. Rabbi Yehuda distinguishes between shogeg and mazid, which we're going to have to understand. Mazid is very simple. If you intentionally use maaser sheni, what did we just learn? He thinks it's mamon hedyot. He thinks it's yours to use however you want. You decide to betroth a woman, no problem. The question is going to be, why though, if you accidentally use your maaser sheni money, won't it be effective? So hold off on that. We're going to explain that in a minute. Then we get to hekdesh. And today we're going to deal with only Rabbi Meir. So we'll start with Rabbi Meir now. Hekdesh, if you take a sanctified item and you betroth a woman, let's say you have money that was sanctified, let's say we're going to do mazid and shogeg. B'mazid kidesh, if you intentionally took your money that you knew was hekdesh money and you betrothed a woman with it, she's betrothed. But if you did it b'shogeg, you did it by accident, you didn't realize that there was hekdesh money, she is not betrothed. So now we want to focus on, Rabbi Yehuda says the opposite in that case, okay? B'shogeg, it works, b'mazid lo kidesh, okay? If you did it accidentally, it actually is effective. If you did it on purpose, it's not. We'll deal with that later. Although maybe I should preface by saying that Rabbi Yehuda is the classic way we understand me'ila. Maybe we'll do some background before we start, which is, what is me'ila? Me'ila is misuse of consecrated property. It comes up in the Torah and it says if you misuse consecrated property, you have to return the value, add an extra fifth, and bring a korban. But what's really critical to understand is, in the pasuk it talks about it only if you did it b'shgaga. If you did it intentionally, then it's not called me'ila, or you're not liable for me'ila. Maybe it is called me'ila, but you're not liable. Maybe because we don't allow you to get atonement. Maybe atonement is only if you accidentally did it. If you did it intentionally, we don't, right? Korban is both good and bad. It means you have to pay money and bring a sacrifice. On the other hand, it gives you an opportunity to atone for yourself. So for whatever reason, we don't really know why, but there is no me'ila b'mezid, okay? Or at least you're not liable. You don't have to bring the sacrifice if it's intentional. So Rabbi Yehuda actually makes a lot of sense, because what does he say? What happens in me'ila is, and this is very important, okay? Pay close attention, because if we don't get this, it's going to be very hard to understand the whole continuation. Me'ila means misuse of consecrated property. So what does it mean? It means I took something and I used it, something that was sacred, and I used it for non-sacred. I used it for my own purposes, my own benefit. That means I basically, what's called chilel, okay? What does it mean, l'chalel mashu? I turned it into chol, okay? That's also I basically took something that was sanctified and I used it as chol. That means it becomes chol by doing it. If it didn't become chol, then I didn't do anything wrong. I kept it as sanctified. So what has to happen here is I used it, and by using it, I made it chol, and that's really why I'm liable, because I turned it into something non-sacred when it was sacred to begin with. So that's really what I'm liable for. So that's a concept we're going to have to understand. Hopefully, as we go on, you'll understand this better. So Rabbi Yehuda basically says, b'shogeg, there's me'ila. So if there's me'ila, what does that mean? It means I took it and I made it chol. I made it not sacred, which means that I can then betroth a woman with it, because I took away, I shouldn't have, but I did by sinning, right? But I took away the sanctity of that item, which means I can now betroth a woman with it. Okay, that's what he says. But if I did it b'mezid, there is no me'ila. So what does that mean? I didn't turn it into chol. So if I didn't turn it into chol, it's still sacred, which means lo kidesh. Then I can't betroth them, right? It's not an effective betrothal. That's Rabbi Yehuda. But what we're going to have to deal with is Rabbi Meir, who says the exact opposite, which doesn't really fit in with what we understand me'ila to be, and we're going to have to try to figure that out. So the first thing we're going to do is point out, again, if you didn't understand this all, don't worry. We're going to go through this a bunch of times, both today and tomorrow's daf, and by then hopefully will be much more clear. So we now have that both Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda say that in a case of shogeg, it doesn't, right? It works. So now, hekdesh, we're talking about when it doesn't work, okay? So now, shigagat maaser to Rabbi Yehuda, okay? So the shgagat for maaser. So Rabbi Yehuda says, that's why I'm reading the wrong thing. Rabbi Meir, when it comes to shogeg, says lo kiddush in meila, and it's sanctified. And Rabbi Yehuda said when it's maaser sheni b'shogeg lo kiddush. So we're going to have to figure out why each of them said it in their case. So comes Rabbi Yaakov and he says, okay, I'm not reading, this line is just a quote from the hekdesh part of the Mishnah, hekdesh b'meizik kiddush b'shogeg lo kiddush, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda b'shogeg kiddush, meizik lo kiddush. Don't focus on that yet. Amar Rabbi Yaakov, shmat minei de Rabbi Yochanan tarti. I heard from Rabbi Yochanan that he said two things. Shigi got maaser to Rabbi Yehuda, ushigi got hekdesh to Rabbi Meir. In other words, again, he's taking the two cases, one that Rabbi Meir said, one that Rabbi Yehuda said about shgaga, unwitting, you didn't realize. In maaser, Rabbi Yehuda said it doesn't work, and in hekdesh, Rabbi Meir says it doesn't work. Now, why is that? Shnehem ein isha mitkadesha behem. So in both those cases, neither one thinks it works. One of them, now what he's going to say is, I basically heard the reason for one of them, and I heard the reason for the other one, but I don't know which matches up with which. And for that, we're going to have two different answers. Both are shgaga. That means when it was done, the action of the betrothal, nobody knew that it was hekdesh, nobody knew it was maaser sheni, right, in each case. Then the issue is, what happens when they find out later that this was maaser sheni or this was hekdesh? So in one of them, when they find out, the woman's going to say, had I known this, I never would have agreed to this. And in the other, both of them are going to say, had we known this, we never would have agreed to it. But I don't know which matches up with which. So what we have right now is a quote of Rabbi Yaakov quoting Rabbi Yochanan, and now we're going to try to answer his question. Okay? Try to match it up. So the first thing we're going to have is Rabbi Yirmia, who's going to explain it one way. And then Rabbi Yaakov himself, who quoted this and said, I don't know which is which, he's going to give his own theory about which goes with which is going to be the opposite of Rabbi Yirmia. I'm a Rabbi Yirmia. Next say Anan. Let's look here. Let's try to think about it. Maaser ihi lo nichalea mishum tircha de orcha. Ihu nichale de nikne itatami mela. The woman doesn't want maaser sheni. Why? Because if she gets maaser sheni as her betrothal money, she can't benefit from that money until she brings it to Jerusalem. What a pain in the neck. She doesn't want to have to go to Jerusalem to benefit from this property. And also, until she can actually benefit from it, she's not actually betrothed. So for her, it's a pain in the neck. She's got to bring this to Jerusalem. When she finds out that instead of giving me this nice ring, you gave me a ring that was actually, well, it would have to be money, let's say. You gave me money or fruits, right? And the fruits have to be brought to Jerusalem to eat, or the money has to be brought there to redeem on fruits in order to buy other produce with it in Jerusalem. Ihu, but it's nichale, but for him, it's convenient. Why? For him, it's a pain to have maaser sheni fruits in his house. Now he's able to get rid of them, right? He wants her betrothed, and he doesn't want to have to eat these fruits in Jerusalem. So what does he do? So I'll betroth her with it. With that, I'll get rid of my maaser sheni. And right, kill two birds with one stone, as they say, even though people say you shouldn't say that anymore. It's not the proper statement to say about killing two birds. But anyway, let's just go with that old phrase. Anyway, basically, I got rid of my maaser sheni and I betrothed the woman. Great. But hekdesh, but if both of them find out, it's a pretty serious offense to misuse of hekdesh, right? If you use hekdesh by accident, wow, like I wouldn't want to have been betrothed by something that took sanctified money and turned it into whole. No way, no how. So that explains, okay, why b'shogeg lo kidesh, okay? So that would be because nobody would want this to happen. Now, Rabbi Yaakov Amar Ipcha, he says, Ipcha mistapa. The opposite makes sense. Why? Mi lo ika lamemar, maaser ihuloni. Couldn't you say the following? Maaser, so first of all, we already know why it's not good for her. She's got to schlep to Jerusalem. She doesn't want to do that. But now wait. She's not going to actually be betrothed till she gets to Jerusalem and actually benefits from the money. Until she has benefit, it's not a betrothal. That means that until the money's brought to Jerusalem, what if something happens to it? Someone steals it from her house. She loses it. Someone steals it on the way. They attack her on the way. They mug her and they steal the money. Until she gets to Jerusalem, it's actually, he has achrayut. He's responsible to replace that money. So it's not good for him when he finds out it's maaser sheni. He thought the betrothal was done, and if she loses the money, it's her problem. But it turns out now it's his problem. He's not going to want that to happen. So Rabbi Yaakov says it's the opposite. And hekdesh, bishlama ihi lo nichale dinitachal hekdesh shal yadat. Well, it's on account of her that it turned into chulin. because she received the money, and when she receives the money, it becomes chol. So she doesn't want that on her. But but it's actually a benefit to him, because hekdesh wasn't actually his really, right? It would belong to the temple. Now he just wants the woman betrothed. If he can actually betroth the woman with this money, better for him. He basically, we say it's no money out of pocket, because it anyway belonged to the temple. It didn't belong to him. So when he finds out that it turned out it wasn't his money, it was hekdesh money, he's thrilled, because no loss of money for him, this whole betrothal thing. So we now have two opposite approaches as to who is the one who's going to say in the end, I wouldn't have wanted this to happen. Now, it doesn't matter really, because in the end, if one side doesn't want it, the betrothal is off. And that explains basically why, again, it's explaining Rabbi Yehuda in the maaser sheni case, why he thinks b'shogeg, because remember, Rabbi Yehuda thinks b'mezi maaser sheni, if you do it intentionally, you know you're using maaser sheni money, you're allowed to, because the maaser sheni money is yours. It doesn't belong to God. But if you did it b'shogeg, because she, or maybe even he, is not going to want that to happen, this is what we call a mekach ta'ut. Mekach ta'ut is, it was a mistaken transaction. Nobody would have agreed to this in the first place, and it's canceled, and basically she's not betrothed. According to Rabbi Meir, it's the case of hekdesh, which we're going to say that, because both of them are going to say, what? Either, or maybe even just one of them, it doesn't really matter. Either which way, again, it matters for this sugya, but I want you to get the concept here. They're going to say, whoever would have wanted to use consecrated property to be betrothed, that's a huge sin. We don't want this, right? And basically we say mekach ta'ut, it's off. And that's Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir, who says b'shogeg, it doesn't work, okay? That's his approach. Now, we're going to understand Rabbi Meir a lot better right now. Isha ein mekadeshet ma'ot ma'u sheyetzu l'chul. Now you say the woman's not betrothed. So what about the money though? Did the money become unsanctified? Because basically what happened? Now here's a very interesting thing. So now we're going to understand Rabbi Meir a lot better now as we go on. According to Rabbi Meir, he takes this money, he gives it to her for betrothal. He doesn't know it's hekdesh. Now normally, if you do this kind of thing in Me'ilah, you use something that's sacred for something non-sacred. You've basically mechalel, you've made it chulin, and because of that, you now have to bring a korban, and you have to replace the value, and you have to bring a sacrifice. But in this case, what does Rabbi Meir say? She's not betrothed. Now, if it turned into chulin, then you should have been liable for Me'ilah, and she should be betrothed because it became chol. You understand? Once it's non-sacred, not sanctified anymore, it should actually be effective to betroth her. So they say the following. Rava asked Rav Chisda, I understand she's not mekadeshet, but since he misused consecrated properly, didn't he turn it into chol anyway? To which he says, Rav Chisda answers him, Isha ein mekadeshet ma'ot he'achetzu l'chulin. He says, if the woman's not betrothed, then how could you possibly say the money became non-sanctified? If the money became non-sanctified, that would go hand in hand with, well, then she's betrothed. Because the whole problem is the money is sacred. And that's why she's not betrothed. So if it turns into chol, then she should be betrothed. So basically, they say the following. When he took the money, now you're going to really understand it much better. When he took the money and betrothed her, didn't know it was hekdesh, then they find out it was hekdesh. They both say, let's assume we go with the option of they both. It doesn't really matter, but let's just go with they both say, oh my goodness, never would have done this. Mekach ta'ut, money goes back. Money remains sanctified in his hands. And nobody, right, they're not betrothed. And no Me'ilah was done because the money went back. You follow? If nothing happened, and this is an interesting thing, something happened, but we erase it basically because we say it was a mekach ta'ut. So then there was no Me'ilah. Okay? Now, this is very complicated because now the Gemara is going to say, what if it was a sale? What if I bought, now I've given this example many times, so I'll go back to this example of Me'ilah. I go to the store, I send you to the store with my money, or I go myself, it doesn't really matter. And I take my sanctified money, which I didn't remember was sanctified, and I bought a carton of milk with it. Normally we say that's Me'ilah. That's a classic case of Me'ilah. According to Rabbi Meir, that is not Me'ilah. Why is that not Me'ilah? Because as soon as, okay, they ask the question, what if it was a sale? And Amar Le, Rav Chisda answers back, Af b'mecher lo kana. According to this understanding of Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Meir. Now, this is just Rabbi Yochanan's understanding. Tomorrow you're going to see Rav, who has a totally different way of understanding this. Rabbi Yochanan says, and the way Rav Chisda understands him is, Anytime I take money and I spend money by accident, sanctified money, that is not me'ila. Because when I find out that it was sanctified, the mecher is canceled, the money goes back, and it's as if nothing happened. So I didn't turn anything into whole. You can't do that with a transaction. So then when is me'ila? And we'll see this later in the next daf. But me'ila is when I consumed it. Let's say I took a sanctified item, okay? Let's say I sanctified my carton of milk. Let's just say I said, this is going to the temple. And then I drank it. I forgot. At that point, I can't undo what I did because it's gone. Then I'm liable on me'ila, according to Rabbi Meir. This is a very unique approach to me'ila. It's not the typical approach. So this is Rabbi Meir, though. So he basically says if it was just a transaction, the transaction is canceled and everything goes back. Nothing was turned into whole. Nothing became unsacred. And therefore, there's no me'ila. So it's a very unique type of approach to understanding me'ila. So now we're just going to end with one side question on this understanding, Rabbi Yochanan's understanding of Rabbi Meir. So basically, what he's saying is, right, me'ila. If you give someone money and they give it back, right, when they find out it was me'ila, there's no me'ila. Basically, there's no one's liable. Well, this is going to show that someone is liable when it's money. So let's see. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, okay, we'll try to understand this case quickly. If I give you money to watch, you're not allowed to use my money unless, right, you're a balabayit, let's say, just a regular person. You can't use it. If you use it, now let's say it turns out I gave you to watch my sanctified money. I didn't remember it was sanctified. I gave it to you to watch. You spent it, okay? And then you gave me back other money, but you spent my sacred money. Who's liable from Ela? You, because you weren't allowed to use my money. It's like the shaliach. When the shaliach does it differently than I asked, they're moel. If not, I'm moel. So if the gizbar, who's the head of the Beit HaMikdash treasury, he takes his own money, thinking it was his own money, but it turns out it was the Beit HaMikdash's money, and he gives it to a balabayit to watch, and it turns out it was the Beit HaMikdash's money. The balabayit uses it and spends it, his problem. If he gives it to a money lender, who always money goes in and out, he's called the shulchani, then basically it's the gizbar's problem. He has the me'ila on him when the shulchani spends the money because he gave it to the shulchani with the intent that the shulchani would spend it. So now we have this machloket. What if the gizbar, the treasurer, gave it to a storekeeper? Is the storekeeper like a balabayit, or is the storekeeper like the shulchani? So there's a machloket Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, which one? But notice, ad kan lo miflage ela de mar savar chemani shulchani or mar savar chemani balabayit. The machloket is who's responsible, the gizbar or the balabayit, right, or the chemvani. But it's clearly one of them is responsible for me'ila for spending this money. Now, according to what Rabbi Meir said, there is no me'ila for spending money. So, but they all agree that if they spent the money, it would be me'ila. So how could Rabbi Meir say this? Because there's machlok of Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, if you say that Rabbi Meir doesn't think there's any problem with spending money because it'll all go back when they realize. To which they answer, Rabbi Meir l'barav to Rabbi Yehuda kamar. He was talking to Rabbi Yehuda on Rabbi Yehuda's terms. What he was saying is, l'didi in motzinami lomal. I think if the gizbar gave the storekeeper money and the storekeeper spent it, there's no me'ila because again, when he finds out, it'll all go back. But you think it's me'ila? At least, so he says, at least according to your interpretation, though, I think that the chemvani is more like a balabayit because he's really not supposed to use the money you gave him to watch. And then Rabbi Yehuda says, no, I think he's like the shulchani. I think when you give it to a storekeeper, you assume he's going to use your money and just give you back other money. So it's a very side machloket, but not having anything to do with this, because Rabbi Meir will say, again, it's just a way to explain Rabbi Meir, not clear that this is really what Rabbi Meir holds, but to explain Rabbi Meir, according to Rabbi Yochanan, you would have to say that he was just talking according to Rabbi Yehuda, okay? But saying, I myself don't think there's me'ila at all. So again, I'll review this all in the next daf so that you understand, right? It's complicated, this issue, but hopefully I made it clear enough and we'll understand it even better as we continue on in the sugya. Wishing everybody a great day. And since I won't see you live till Sunday or Monday for those keeping Yantif, so Chag Sameach, Shabbat Shalom, and Hoshana Rabbah Sameach. See you on Sunday, Monday.